Good afternoon. My name is Charles Wessner. I'm a senior advisor here at the Renewing American Innovation project at the Center for Strategic and International Studies here in Washington. This project, spearheaded by my colleague Dr. Sujay Shivakumar, is looking at ways and means of renewing the American innovation system, in which, of course, the semiconductor industry is at the forefront. Today, I have the great privilege of welcoming Dr. David Anderson, the president of the Albany NanoTech complex at New York Creates, a facility operating at the state-of-the-art in semiconductor research and development, and one which is a key in the U.S. and global semiconductor ecosystems. Dave, welcome to CSIS.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
We're pleased to have you here. I don't think I need to tell too many people watching us that the economic challenges that emerged from the pandemic are no secret. The challenges shined a bright light on the importance of computer chips, and it underscored the need to restore U.S. Manufacturing production in the semiconductor industry. There's both a geopolitical and a national economic imperative. One of the main reasons we're speaking here today is because the U.S. CHIPS Act, which resulted from these shortages, but also from some of the geopolitical challenges that we're facing now, is designed to solidify the American computer chip supply chain and ensure continued U.S. R&D prominence. Meanwhile, your organization, New York Creates, has been focused in these areas for more than 2 decades. One of the things that I find strange here in Washington is that people talk a lot about semiconductors, but only too few seem to know about Albany. They think of Silicon Valley, but not New York. After all, you guys wear ties up there and it snows. But tell us a little bit about the origin of the Albany Nano Center and what actually does it do?
Sure. Well, certainly the chip shortage and the supply chain issues we had during the recent pandemic really shone a spotlight on the industry. And in fact, chips and chip shortage became dinner table conversation. Right. And that's been a benefit for the overall industry around the world, as not only the U.S. but other countries have recognized the strategic importance for national security and economic security of the industry, of the chip industry, and it's been beneficial as to the formation of the CHIPS Act and where that's taking us. As for New York Creates, it's the New York Center for Research, Economic Advancement, Technology, Engineering, and Science. That's where the Creates comes from. But it's really better known, as you said, as Albany NanoTech Complex. New York Creates manages several sites across the state from a technology and economic development perspective, but the largest of which is the Albany NanoTech Complex and our test assembly and packaging facility in Rochester with AIM Photonics Institute, which is one of the American manufacturing institutes for integrated photonics. In Albany, we've been there over 2 decades with a significant amount of investment, primarily from the state, but also from industry. That's been about $20 billion in program investment over the last couple of decades that created a site there that is about 150,000 square feet of clean room and state-of-the-art equipment. We have the latest generations, in fact, multiple generations of lithography, which is what we use to print at the leading edge of device technology. And we have that infrastructure there with many partners. We are a not-for-profit, a 501c corporation that owns and operates the facilities, and our partners, such as IBM, Tokyo Electron, Applied Materials, ASML, and many others, are utilizing our facility for development of next-generation technologies.
And this is a facility that we see here behind us?
Yes, this is the Albany NanoTech facility. We have over 1 million square feet in space, but as I said, 150,000 square feet of state-of-the-art clean room. Interestingly enough, we also on site have the University at Albany with their Center for Nanoscale Science and Engineering, as well as a high school, Tech Valley High School. So we have bits and pieces of the entire ecosystem.
Well, that's very important, that educational. One of the questions that people often ask, is there Are there comparable facilities elsewhere in the country that?
No, not in the country. We are actually the largest and most advanced open access, if you will, public-private research facility in the U.S. There are some labs, of course, that are private labs of some of the major semiconductor companies that have comparable technologies, but one that's accessible by the industry, it's the only one that exists in the U.S.
And that is the key differential, that you welcome companies from all parts of the world.
Large and small. As
Right.
I mentioned, we have partnerships with companies like IBM and Micron and Applied Materials, very large companies. But on the other hand, we work with many startups and small and medium enterprises that are running new technologies and proving new process.
Actually, that's a very important point you raised, because there's been a lot of talk, and we'll get to that, about the new National Semiconductor Technology Center helping small companies. A key challenge seems to be taking things from the lab to the fab. And we have these creative professors that come up with really interesting designs, but then how do we do the testing? And,
Yes.
And you can play a role in that, is that correct?
We do. In fact, we run multi-project wafers, which is basically just taking a piece of the full wafer for a new product or something, so that it's very cost effective for a professor or a startup to access the line. And we help them. We have an engineering team that helps them develop technologies, and so we have many companies that come out of universities that work with us to prove technologies that ultimately become established and move forward. Menlo Micro is a great example that came out of the university, proved their technology with us as a startup, and they just recently built their own fab in New York. And so we have those success stories that are coming through in many different types of technologies.
That's remarkable, because that is seen as one of the central challenges, is having facilities which, as I understand it, the large fabs that Micron or Intel run really can't take time off to work with small companies.
No, that's the advantage of being a research facility.
Right.
That's what we do.
That's the job, right.
So we are really a research institute with manufacturing equipment as opposed to a manufacturer doing research. Yes.
Well, you've got these, this impressive facility. Can you summarize a little bit some of the investments that have been made in that? And I understand there was a recent announcement as well.
Yes, over time there's been numerous investments made in program activity with the state of New York supporting new technology development with Tokyo Electron, with IBM, with Applied Materials, and more recently, as you said, directly with New York Creates to build the new facility. So we have created a high NA EUV program. It's a high numeric aperture, extreme ultraviolet lithography. It is the next generation of lithography that will be able to print sub 2 nanometer devices. Currently, we have the current generation of extreme ultraviolet technology. This is the next generation, and so our new facility, it's a new 50,000 square foot addition to clean room, which will be structurally built to house the new high-NA tool, which will come at the end of 2025 from ASML, and we'll begin installing the tools around that and be operational in 26.
And that's what we see here.
Yes, this is actually an artist's rendition of the new fab. All the darker roofed buildings are existing facilities, as is the white one on the top there, but we call this nanofab reflection because it's kind of a mirror image of the existing fab, but it's being built, breaking ground this month, and will be completed by the end of 2025.
That's actually rather quick.
It's an aggressive schedule,
Yes,
but we have to meet the tool delivery date. So, the high-NA tools are on a schedule. We have number 6 in the world coming to us. The first one was actually just delivered a couple of weeks ago to Intel, being proven out, and so we really will be leading edge capabilities when that tool arrives.
That is really
it's a waiting list
edge,
to get
isn't
to
it?
those
Yeah.
tools.
And in fact, I understand that getting those tools is actually quite an accomplishment. It's a vote of confidence both by your supporters and by the New York
Well,
State.
certainly with our partners in this High NA project. It's a $10 billion program over 8 to 10 years, with $1 billion invested by the state of New York. 500 to build the new building, as you see here, and 500 for the High NA, 500 million for the High NA EUV tool and the supporting equipment. So our partners, Micron, IBM, Tokyo Electron, Applied Materials, and many others, both domestic and international, joining together to create this $10 billion program over an investment over the next 10 years.
Am I right in thinking that there are relatively few states, if any, who are able to muster that level of funding for?
Well, it's interesting. I think as the CHIPS Act has come out, more states have rallied to the table with investing money. But you know, what we've seen in New York is it's been repeated investment over the past couple of decades. And this most recent investment, supported by Governor Hochul, is in support of their GO Semi office, the Governor's Office for Semiconductor Advancement, as well as the Green Chips Act in New York, which is to reduce emissions and promote use of renewable energies and so forth. New York, over the past 2.5 decades, has really seen 5 different governors of both parties supportive of the industry. And very few states can sustain that level of investment over time. They can come up with it one time, maybe a second time in 10 years, but it's very difficult to sustain that level of investment. But it does pay back. The economic return, as you know from your study of the regional renaissance, you know, it is a significant economic return for those invested dollars.
Well, that is remarkable. I mean, having looked at this sector for a good part of my career, the fact that they're able to invest, but also really substantially invest, and perhaps most importantly, as you point out, across Democratic and Republican administrations. Only too often in state politics, as you know, around the country, the first thing the new governor does is throw out everything the former governor was doing.
Absolutely, but I think, you know, as you see the progression of what's happened here over the past 25 years, the expansion of global foundries, which is not far away, Micron coming to the state, the rest of the ecosystem, Edwards Vacuum building a facility there in support of the industry. It really is about growing that ecosystem, and with that ecosystem comes investment and jobs.
And you've brought in Wolfspeed as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, Wolfspeed is another great example. They built a silicon carbide fab a couple of years ago. And while they were building their facility in Utica, they utilized our line and our tool set to transfer their process to 200 millimeter. And they were able to take not only the process that they developed on our tool set, but the tool set itself to install in their fab in Utica, and accelerated their ramp of their new fab by probably 18 months. So it's a really great example of how we partner with industry to not only help them make the investment, but help them get to manufacturing quicker.
Yeah, and a pause, I mean, on that point, getting to manufacture, given the level of investment, not everyone realizes how important speed matters, that the investments are very high.
The investments are billions,
yes,
tens of billions of dollars for leading edge. And getting return on that investment, getting to money quicker is very important. And so we're not just a research center that does research of really cool things. We are close to manufacturing. In fact, our line is a full manufacturing flow like you would see at Global Foundries or Micron or TSMC. And so same equipment, same processes, and so we are really developing technologies that can get to manufacturing quicker.
Well, you know, it's interesting, you mentioned the Global Foundries, which was attracted, and a large part of that was the existence of this facility. Wolfspeed, you just mentioned, and yeah, I remember reading that one of the reasons they came was because of your facility.
That's correct, and the same goes for our friends at Micron.
Yes.
They called out numerous reasons why they came to New York. One was available water and power, the second was a talented workforce, and the third was a R&D infrastructure that exists in Albany. And they've demonstrated that by joining the programs.
Well, actually, you identify a number of challenges that we have in this country. The workforce, but strangely for an American to have to talk about problems with water and power, when we did the research, we discovered that quality power, unvarying power, was absolutely critical, and we seem to have more infrastructure work that we need to do there.
We do. Around the country, we have several areas we need to work on the power grid. New York has plenty of power and consistent power. It's interesting, water is a great example, and you hear all these rumblings of why would anybody build a fab in Arizona, but the industry has really been aggressive about water reuse and reduction, to the extent that many fabs are putting out more clean water than they're taking in. And so
yes, I've heard that.
Really,
that's interesting.
It really is. It is an environmentally aggressive industry. Sustainability is one of the major issues that we focus on, and it's necessary, because not only is the power consumed to build the product, but with the rapid rise of artificial intelligence and other processing capabilities and data centers, it's consuming more power. And so some of the research we do is reducing the power used by the chips themselves that go into data centers to reduce
which has
the overall, has a long-term benefit.
Yeah. One of the things I remember from the research is the very significant, you've mentioned all these facilities coming in, but the regional economic impacts and the employment impacts are significant. Could you address that a bit?
Sure. There's various studies that are out there that say for every direct semiconductor job, there's another 5 or 6 in the ecosystem in support of that, in the semiconductor ecosystem. And then, there's maybe 14 additional regional jobs in support of that, with hotels, retail, restaurants, and so forth. And so it really does have a major impact. For example, the expectation in central New York, when Micron builds their fabs, is that they will have about 9,000 ecosystem jobs, and that'll translate to more than 40,000 jobs in central New York.
Yeah, I think our audience should keep in mind that the numbers you're using here in terms of regional development are massive. They're a stunning amount.
Yes, and they're global. They're not just where we're located. They are numbers that have been proven across the industry wherever it's located.
And they're not just any job. I mean, I don't know what the average, but when we did our work, it was between $90,000 and $100,000 average per job.
Yeah, I mean, it's even more than that, I'd say now. I mean, in New York alone, the contribution of the industry is about $5.7 billion to the state in wage impact. And we have about 35,000 direct employees in the industry. Simple math says they're pretty high-paying jobs.
Yes. Well, that I think that is an important point because sometimes there was certainly criticism in New York in the beginning when they were funding not only this center but also the Global Foundries facility, that the subsidies, why would you give $1 billion or in the case $1.2 billion to a company when they're going to create, the requirement was 1,200 jobs. The funny thing is they didn't do that. They didn't succeed at creating 1,200. They created 3,500.
That's correct. Yeah, and I think that investment, if you go back and look at the reports on the return, has paid off more significantly than they ever expected.
Yes.
And so it really has.
That in fact is the point, that it was, the returns are massive. And there's also sometimes a risk, if I'm not mistaken, of a static analysis where people look at how many jobs and what's the subsidy, but in fact, the jobs stay, and
the jobs stay. We're a sticky industry.
Yes.
I mean, you're making a $10 billion investment on building a leading edge facility. It's not going to go away in 3 or 4 years.
Yes, no,
It's there for the long term, and so it is an important aspect of this, not only historically, but as we look to the future and where the industry is going and the opportunities for growth with AI and quantum computing and other technologies. It's going to be around for a very long time, and it's going to continue to grow, as we've just seen the announcement of Global Foundries expanding their facility in Malta. They've been there about a decade, and now they're going to double their size, and so it's really exciting.
That raises an important point, is there's been a lot of talk about where the focus of the CHIPS Act should be and where the NSTC is going to be. And at the very least, I would expect you see yourself as a major node as part of the CHIPS Act. But you know, I'm from Pennsylvania, so I'm not really a big booster of New York. But
I'm from Pennsylvania also.
But the broader point is that, could you talk a little bit about the assets? Some people have said, well, why don't we just set up another center somewhere else? And I think it's important people to understand what we've been talking about here is this longevity in investment, the cumulative effect of this investment. Could you address that? Could we easily set up another center somewhere else?
Not easily, not with the dollars and the time frame that are allocated to things like the NSTC. You know, the numbers around $5 billion for NSTC. To duplicate our facility would be more than that $5 billion. And it would take several years to come into play. And, you know, we're looking at goals such as 20% of leading edge manufacturing returning to the U.S. by 2030. That's not far away.
That's right.
And so to duplicate a facility is near impossible to get that type of engagement on those metrics over time. But on the other hand, one facility can't do everything. And so, as you mentioned, you know, we expect to play whatever role we're called to play for the NSTC. We have the largest and most advanced technology development facility in the U.S. for semiconductors. Everything from lagging nodes to the leading edge. But we don't have everything. We don't do a lot of the legacy technologies that other facilities can do. We do have advanced packaging, heterogeneous integration, 3D packaging, and chiplet technologies, both here in the Albany site and in our Rochester facility. But there's others that have those capabilities as well, and that horizon of technologies is very large with very limited standardization. And so there will be other facilities that play significant roles in the NSTC, but we hope and plan to play a major role ourselves.
Well, it would seem logical. I mean, you mentioned the cost and the speed, which, as you mentioned earlier, is incredibly important in this industry, particularly if we're going to meet the goals the country has set for itself. But there's also a point which you might address, is the competency and the established protocols. I mean, it's very hard to set up those types of protocols and get those memberships out of thin air.
Yeah, that's the other challenge with building a new facility. Not only are you spending billions of dollars up front to build a facility, it costs billions of dollars per year to operate a facility like this. And one of the things we've been able to develop over time is a model that is financially sustainable. We do not have any government investment from an annual operating perspective. It all comes from industry programs and the support we have from those activities and the processing we do in the line. Go ahead.
That raises an interesting question, because one of the things that we did with the Manufacturing USA program, which has not worked out so well, was we had a 5-year time horizon, and we'd make investments and then it would become self-sustaining. I want to talk further about it, but the big research center in Europe called IMEC has been there even longer than Albany. It's been there 40 years. But as you know, probably better than anyone, they still get 25% of their operating budget from a variety of public sources.
Right.
And how do you see that going forward? I mean, one of the constraints that we encountered, particularly with Semitech, the previous consortium, was when the federal funding stopped, it was really unable to take on new initiatives that it needed to do. And how do you see that for going forward for Albany?
Well, I think Albany has a sustainable model that we've developed over time with our industry partnerships. And all of the partnerships that we have on site are continuing to grow. And so as we expand, our partners are expanding as well. We have about 2,700 researchers and other employees on site, not just our own. We have about 800 of New York creates, but IBM is there, Tokyo Electron, Applied Materials, all have in the hundreds. And many of the other suppliers, ASML, Lam Research, KLA, and Screen, and others have personnel on site. And so it really is an ecosystem we've built, and it's built on the programs of our participating companies. And so we have that model that's sustainable over time. As NSTC activity comes on board, we've carved out capacity to be able to hit the ground running, as you say, right, day one, to help invigorate and launch that activity. We've built a site that's based around prototyping. It's close to manufacturing. It's new technologies, but it's ready to drop into a foundry. And we have several examples of companies that have developed their technology with us and gone to the likes of Global Foundry for their manufacturing. And we're still doing development of next generation. And so it is a sustainable model over time, which is unique in the world, yes, from the standpoint of not having any operational support.
Right. Well, some might argue that you should probably get that operational support going forward. But,
that'd be very nice. We could do more.
Yes, it's a very powerful. I mentioned IMAC. You're talking, and I think very convincingly, about being able to cooperate with a wide variety of companies and with other centers in the U.S. But there's also an international dimension. I've been surprised with some of our work here at CSIS, not surprised, but pleased, to learn that the major centers, research centers in the world, want to cooperate with New York, with the Albany NanoCluster, and that includes IMAC, and that includes Leti, which is an outstanding center in France, and there's also this new Japanese initiative called Rapidus, where they're coming to New York for the expertise. Could you talk a little bit about that international dimension?
Sure, of course. I think we obviously have New York in our name of NY Creates, but it's a global industry, and from the very start, we've worked with global partners. Tokyo Electron was one of the first partners we had on site, and they've put their TEL Technology Center Americas there, and it's their largest R&D outside of Japan. And so we're working with international partners all the time. As we've gone forward and worked with more companies, and that we find that our peer organizations around the world also work with many of the same companies. We're doing slightly different things, but we have a lot of synergies, and so we are engaged in some programs with IMEC, with CEA Leti, with Fraunhofer in Germany. We have some memorandum of understanding with the Korea Institute of Advancing Technologies and some other Korean research institutes, as well as, you mentioned, working with Japan and helping Rapidus. We actually have about 150 engineers from Rapidus on site working with IBM to learn their process to put in their 2-nanometer manufacturing process to put into their fab as it's being built. Similar model almost to what we did with Wolfspeed.
Well, I don't mean to be jingoistic, but it is kind of impressive that countries on the scale and of the capability of Japan have sent their people to learn what you can teach them, and that the French and the Europeans, for IMEC in general, I think to cooperate closely with you. I mean, it's a compliment.
I think we all recognize that it's a very challenging industry. The technology problems and the grand challenges are difficult, and they're very expensive. And we all
as cooperative and complementary rather than competitive. Is that
absolutely. We've done some deep studies with our peer organizations, and we find many areas of synergy and complementarity. And yes, there may be some areas of competition, but they're very small by comparison to the synergies.
Well, some of us have argued too that a bit of competition is not a bad thing.
True.
So it's
absolutely. That's made the industry survive.
Right?
Yes.
One of the things that people worry about a lot, informed people, is how do we get the CHIPS Act? Many people would some people would argue that it's actually been already a resounding success. There's some $200 billion of proposed investments, and that sum seems to be climbing. as a result of the announcement of the act and the combination of the grants and the investment tax credits, both of which are very powerful. But the underlying question is, we can build the fabs, but do we have the people? And can we staff these? And what would your role be in helping to ameliorate that? And more broadly, what policies do you think we ought to be adopting?
That's a great question, and I think well, we were together in Brussels at the SEMI International Policy Summit last week, and there's a lot of discussion there about workforce, and it's not a U.S. problem. It's a global industry challenge as we continue to grow. If you look at the data from that SEMI collects on new fabs, there's 109 fabs announced and either announced or under construction to be built before 2030. And if you look at the, becoming $1 trillion industry in the same time frame, that's not even enough fabs. And if you look at the numbers of employment in a region that those fabs create, there's some estimation of about 1 million jobs required between now and 2030, and that's around the globe. And so workforce is a key issue, and it is, frankly, a key element of all of the CHIPS Act activities, whether it's the incentives money or the R&D money. It all requires a significant focus on workforce development. As for ourselves, we've had some training centers over time. We have the Northeast Advanced Technology Education Center, NeoTech, that has been training technicians and engineers for a number of years. And we're sharing that curriculum with other universities and training centers across the U.S. We have programs with community colleges to train technicians, and we've trained several hundred technicians that have gone to Global Foundries with Hudson Valley Community College. We're doing the same thing, preparing for the same growth in the Syracuse area as Micron comes on board. And we also have Applied Materials, for example, just recently built their Global Training Center on site. And we have access to that in training technicians and workers across that. And we have a Veterans Semiconductor Technology Education program. We call it VetStep. And that is focused on veterans returning from the services and coming into the industry. And during the last 6 months of their service, they can apply for this apprenticeship program where they come on site with New York Crates for 2 weeks and then go to an apprenticeship with one of our industry partners for 6 to 8 weeks. And then they're trained on the tools. So they might be a helicopter mechanic one day, and when they exit the service, they could be an applied materials technician the next. And so it really is fantastic, and it's a great source of workers for the industry because they're well trained, they're very mechanically inclined, they're disciplined, and they're hungry to find their next role. And so we have had about a 90% success rate in bringing people who have come through the program into the industry.
That's remarkable.
And
90% is very, very high.
So we have really 3 missions, or 3 elements of our mission, if you will, at New York Crates. The first and foremost, of course, is advancing technology, research and development through our industry partners and the academic partners. The second is advancing the innovation economy, so advancing the industry across the region. And the third is workforce development. And we do that with our academic partners, with the community colleges, and as I mentioned, with the Veterans Program, and many others. And so we are very focused on workforce.
Without detracting from the accomplishments, particularly the technical level that you're talking about, training top flight semiconductor engineers takes a long time. And one of the paradoxes of our current policies is that we call it a national imperative, and yet at the same time we're not able to recruit globally. India produces wonderful top flight engineers, and there's closer collaboration now between India and the US, but still on the immigration side it's tough. And we also, in a great act of self-harm, after they've attended, those who do get in the country and go to school and they attend MIT and they're top flight, we give them a diploma and we ask them to leave. Go work for a competitor somewhere.
Yes.
What do you think we should do? Should we get
Well,
a carve-out for national security grounds?
I think we'd be supportive of a national security carve-out, and certainly those educated in the U.S., we should try to keep those rising stars. But we're not alone in that either. I mean, we recently saw in the news how ASML is, asking Netherlands to open up that, and so because 40% of their workforce comes globally. We're talking with Rapidus in Japan, same thing. They expect the workers to be globally because each region is producing talent, but they all have a workforce issue, and so in some sense we're stealing from each other, but it's necessary to keep the industry moving forward.
Well, it seems like an area where we need to get our policies more aligned with our goals, and I hope here you'll be able to work with us at CSIS on getting towards that.
Well, in the U.S., we need more focus on bringing the younger generation into the industry. We have 43,000 STEM graduates a year across the state of New York, but they don't go into semiconductors. They go into other things, and so we really do need to generate that interest at the childhood level and carry it through into the industry. So it's a long-term approach, but we do have a short-term need as well.
We had the privilege and the honor to have Secretary Raimondo, the Secretary of Commerce, here 10 days ago to talk about progress with the CHIPS Act. And one of her announcements, which was particularly important, was that her goal was to achieve 20% of the world's leading edge semiconductor manufacturing by 2030. I'd be interested to know whether you think that's realistic, and how could the Albany Nano Center contribute to achieving that goal?
It's a challenging goal, but it's not 20% of total manufacturing, it's 20% of leading edge manufacturing.
Right.
So with the likes of Micron, Intel, TSMC, Samsung building new fabs in the US, those are all leading edge fabs. But as we look to the other fabs announced around the world, the whole total is rising, and so achieving 20% of the leading edge, while might be achievable, it's going to be a challenging goal. But certainly it's one worth going after, and from a national security and an economic security standpoint. Our entity at New York Creates works on the leading edge, and so we are supporting developing the process that goes into those factories. And Samsung has been on site for a very long time. Same with Micron coming on board to New York and supporting advancement of those technologies and the process that they're using. The High-NA EUV Center is another good example of supporting that leading edge, because that will be the very leading edge of technology. And that will support the lithography process for all entities that are building factories in that space. And our site, throughout the course of EUV development, had the first beta tool for the first EUV system and 2 other versions and the current one we have now, and the next leading edge. And so we really have been part of that ecosystem of developing not only the process, but the materials necessary to take us to the future.
Well, you make two, among many, you make 2 important points there. And one is that you have the EUV. In fact, it might be helpful for our broader audience if you would just briefly, I spent one whole afternoon as ASML trying to understand how that tool works. But if you could mention just what the basic lithography process is and why the tool is so important, it would be useful.
Yeah, the simplest way to explain it is it's almost like a photographic process where you use a stencil, let's say you shine a light through and it creates a pattern on the chip, the wafer that we're building. But the complexity of the EUV tool, that we call it a tool. It is a very expensive piece of equipment that I would argue is one of the most advanced pieces of machinery ever built by mankind. It uses droplets of molten tin that are hit some 50,000 times a second by a laser, that vaporizes that, and when it does, it produces a specific wavelength of light, which is extreme ultraviolet of 13 nanometers, and that's what's used to create the devices. So the smaller the wavelength of the light, the smaller we can print on a chip, and so it really is a very complex process, and therefore the price of what we're doing.
Well, that is, if I'm not mistaken, as we mentioned earlier, that's a huge competitive advantage, comparable advantage for you, that you have a tool that virtually no one else, there's
Yes.
6 others or 5 others in the world at this point.
It's a huge competitive advantage, especially for public-private partnership, open access model, because very few companies can afford to have one of those tools in a singular company research center. But not only that tool, the rest of the process equipment we have for pre and post processing on that technology is the cost advantage of using a shared facility like ours.
Right.
And so while some companies may be able to afford their research centers, having that there and being able to access all the tools and all the processes at just the usage of what they're doing, they don't have to bear the total cost of that. And so when it's shared amongst dozens of partners, it really does make it a cost-effective way to do your development.
Yeah, one description we used of you in our review was you're kind of a semiconductor Switzerland, where you're a neutral place where companies can use very expensive equipment that basically they couldn't afford to buy by themselves. But
right.
Working collectively, it's a facility that serves everybody.
It is. We are a neutral space. We use a manufacturing execution system like any fab would use, but data is compartmentalized so that there's no access to data beyond the users, and so it is the Switzerland environment of research and development. Yes.
And we've talked a little bit about some of the competition for everyone wants the NSTC, but some of us just don't think analytically that everybody can do an NSTC, that because of this unique equipment. But you do have cooperative relationships, if I'm not mistaken, with Purdue, for example, and are there others that you work with around the country?
Sure. We've talked with folks, obviously in Indiana, in Texas, in Arizona, Portland, California. So we have relationships with a lot of the entities that are out there. And, we're looking at, obviously the NSTC has to be a network of the best capabilities to be used wherever they're practical. And so, while we have what we consider the most advanced technologies, there's others. And so there will be a network of capabilities across the U.S. And that brings a lot more to bear to solve the grand challenges of the future.
But you are, if I'm not mistaken, the highest cost facility with the most advanced equipment at least for logic, which is again the highest cost and the most advanced, or at least one of the most advanced technologies. Is that a fair statement?
Well, yeah, certainly the investment made here in the leading edge would be a higher cost investment than would be practical at lagging technologies. But we work not only on logic, but we're also doing memory, embedded memory. We're doing neuromorphic computing. We're doing quantum devices, photonics, power devices, and so forth. So we have a broad spectrum of capabilities that we bring to bear. But we certainly hope are utilized as a prototyping facility for anything, mostly logic, but beyond that as well.
Well, when you look at this, I have to say, when you drive down the highway from the airport and you come up to this, it is just a shining castle on the hill, in a sense. It's just an incredibly impressive facility, not to mention when you get inside and see the complexity of the tasks.
We say a lot that seeing is believing.
Yes.
I mean, you can look at a picture and say, yeah, that's a nice set of buildings there, but when you come and see the magnitude of what's there and the capabilities that we have and what's coming, right, it really is an impressive.
Well, the $20 billion investment and, as you say, what's coming is very encouraging for Albany, encouraging for New York. And I must say, from the perspective of CSIS, it's very encouraging for the country.
Well, we hope to, we really look at it as a national asset, and it may be the best kept secret in some regards, but we hope to play whatever roles necessary to maintain our capabilities at the leading edge in the U.S.
Well, I think it has been a secret kept only too well, and I hope that our discussion here today helps cast some light on a national asset, a national jewel, really. Yes. And I thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Thank you very much.